Good evening, everybody. It is 6 o'clock here in Houston, Texas, and we're just going to get started in another minute. My name is Bryn Larson. I'm with Photo Relevance, a gallery here in Houston, and we're delighted to bring you this talk tonight with Culture Place and in collaboration with the Dallas Art Fair. So hold on just another moment and we're going to get started with our two panelists. Okay, it looks like we have a wonderful group already, and I want to welcome everyone to this wonderful dialogue tonight with our artist Robert Calafiore and Paper City's Calafiore and Anspon. My name is Bryn Larson, and I, together with Jeffrey Kozlov, I'm the co-owner of Photo Relevance, which is a photography-based gallery in Houston, Texas. And we're delighted to work with and represent Robert Calafiore and his beautiful and very unique photo-based work, which you're going to hear about tonight. I want to thank Culture Place and Calafiore and Anspon for putting this together and making a marriage for us, which is so exciting because Photo Relevance is new to Culture Place.
It was meant to be, yeah.
Well, and Robert's event and this wonderful dialogue tonight is kicking off this week for our gallery to be featured with Culture Place.
See, I was going to be stealth. I was going to like start listening in and not tell everyone I was on the phone. Well, how are you both? And Christina, it's nice to meet you.
Oh, I'm hearing some background noise. If everyone can be muted. I want to introduce our
right. Well, I am pen in hand and ready. Yes.
I don't know why that happened. I'm not sure. So anyway,
can you hear me, Catherine? I'm hearing some interference in the background.
What that is.
The owner yesterday, the main curator, suggested as soon as he's back from his month-long trip to Venice, he will be really busy with an installation for a 2-month showcase.
Okay.
What is the gallery? Is that a university space or what is that?
Oh.
Is that gone? I don't know what happened with
my Catherine, we're hearing a recording of some kind in the background. I don't know. Robert, can you hear me clearly, Robert?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Okay. Well, let's proceed and see if we're okay. Catherine is known to many of us here in Houston, where she's based, as a executive editor at Paper City magazine.
There's a huge population there of very well-heeled,
excuse me, I don't know if there's
right?
something happening on the computer here.
Interesting. Well, I'll look that up.
Maybe something open, Catherine, on your screen, perhaps, that's running in the background.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, that's better.
Excellent.
I don't know what that was. It seems like a ghost in the machine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Catherine, I think many people know you. We in Houston are always delighted to see you and to experience your enthusiasm for the arts and your wonderful coverage of what's going on all over Texas. And you yourself are writing extensively about contemporary art all over and have published some beautiful books and collaborations and different things. So we're so happy to have you and delighted that you're joining. And I want to introduce Robert Calafiore, who is our artist. we were talking earlier as we were all preparing for this evening that I met Robert, Jeffrey Kozlov, who I work with and who is my partner in the gallery. We met Robert in Portland, Oregon, way back in 2017. And we're just very excited to meet him and see his work. We were there with a portfolio review through Photo Lucida, which is a very interesting portfolio review. And we were so taken with what Robert is doing. I'm very excited for people to see his work. Robert is really steeped in photography, having done both his bachelor's and his MFA with a real expertise and specialty in photography. And you're going to see from his work that he's really steeped in these early processes and very skilled. And I think in taking early mastery of these early wet, darkroom, difficult processes and bringing them forward in such a unique and contemporary way. Robert is joining us tonight from West Hartford, Connecticut, where he is an assistant dean at the Hartford Art School. So welcome to both of you.
Oh gosh, thank you so much, Bryn. We're really thrilled to be part of this and to Culture Place and to Paper City. It's a really great gig here, and we love being able to try to keep up with the Texas art world, and those that are, you know, national artists, like you have brought Robert here. So and Sarah Blagden, who's the fearless person who handles all the technology and keeps us all everything going.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. Thank you, Bryn. Thank you, Jeffrey Kozlov at Photo Relevance. And thank you to Culture Place and Dallas Art Fair, and to Catherine. Thank you. It's so great to see you again and to be here with everyone. I'm very excited.
Wonderful. Well, I know, Robert, you have some slides to show us so we can introduce people to the work. And I wanted to encourage anyone with questions to submit those through the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get to those. But I'd love for people to see what you're working on, Robert, and to be introduced to how you start. So, and I know Catherine has lots of questions about that.
Oh my goodness, this is fascinating. Well, tell us, these are your subjects of one of the series, but what are we looking at here, and sort of what range of collections were these collections your family started? And I understand from our pre-conversation you are continuing the glass collecting mania. So tell us a little bit about what we have going on here. You know, what are we looking at? What time period? And how long is this? A half century of collecting, or?
Yeah, it's nearly half a century of collecting, because I've been obsessed with these kinds of objects since I was a child, really growing up and looking at them in not only my parents' home, but my aunts and uncles, and everywhere I went, the extended family, and the sort of stereotypical, quintessential Italian extended family, where everyone is an aunt and an uncle and a cousin, and everybody had this glass. You know, my parents came here in the 40s from Sicily, and a number of these objects, lots of them, were the first nicer objects that my parents were able to afford and buy and have around the home. And they were super special to me and to my family, yet they were very ordinary, sort of everyday objects. There isn't anything necessarily extraordinary about them. Craft at that time and the way objects were made, there was a great attention paid, I think, to more everyday objects. It's difficult today to find a beautiful or well-made object unless you're spending a ton of money. There's been a shift in the way we make things, so I'm really interested in that and material. But these were made with such care, and there was such thought put into design and color and so forth. And so they were just really special to me, and I have been stealing them from family ever since I had the opportunity to, and have gone on to collecting them since then. So I have hundreds of them.
And it's wonderful that you have added, you know, these are part of, they've all gone to you. Now, are we looking at primarily these great American glassmakers? Tell us, what are these, are some of these antique pieces, sandwich glass? I mean, what are we looking at here?
It's mostly mid-century, so it really represents that moment when my parents arrived in the United States, that sort of mid-century glass made in the 50s and 60s. There's some pieces a little earlier, some pieces a little bit later, but I really have given myself some parameters there in collecting, because you could really go crazy. I mean, there's
So
just
crazy.
so much. So I've really limited it to that period.
I want to ask because, you know, growing up outside of Pittsburgh was actually one of the early glassmaking centers, but I know one of my friends who's now in New York, Tommy Napier, who was with the Menil, he loves the Blanco glass. Do you have any of that here, or
Oh yeah. There's Blanco and Fire King and just all of the classic American makers. There's also some Italian Murano glass mixed in here and there from that same period.
Did you acquire that, or did your parents acquire the Murano?
They had some, and I went on to acquire the rest of it. It's usually the pieces that you see in that bottom photograph that have the lid that's sort of a kind of circus tent.
Yeah.
Not that particular one, but a lot of the ones like that are Italian, and they're either made, you know, in Murano or Empoli. The Empoli glass is really popular, and they made those circus tent covered jars by the thousands.
You know, that has such a sense of ceremony. I know when we spoke yesterday, you know, Bryn commented on these extraordinary colors, which have inspired, you know, both your bodies of work, which we'll be looking at today. And I'm glad you're definitely more in the Baroque range, and definitely would you say you're kind of like a Matisse colorist, or, I mean, how do you see your color palette?
Yeah, the heavily saturated, that rich, luscious, velvety, deep color is what I'm attracted to, and Baroque sensibility would be a good way to describe how I normally see things, kind of a little bit over the top, a little bit decadent, a little bit more than you might need. And I've always really thought like I'm not sure I should say this out loud. Sometimes I'm jealous of painters. You know, I think like a painter, because I want to be able to just kind of put this here and this there and make that whatever color I want. And mixing pigment on a palette is just such a beautiful thing. And the material's gorgeous, and the whole process of mixing color. And well, I just wanted to do the same thing, but with light and objects, and pushing different color lights through different color objects, and getting things to happen similarly to what happens in painting. So I think the way these are laid out is very much part of my personality too. It's a little bit type A, a little bit over organized and very structured, and I like to control the space and not the opposite. And so I want to know when I need a red piece, what shapes I have and where they are and what I need.
And it's interesting, we'll get into this. Unlike a painter, if a painter wants red, he pulls out the cadmium tune, but with you, it's sort of, you have to think in the reverse way, how it turns out on the photo paper. Oh my goodness, this is such a tremendous image, right? It's so, you know, almost like a reliquary or something. What do we tell us about this, Robert?
Yeah, exactly. I think, sitting in Sunday church week to week growing up as a child, I wasn't paying attention to what was going on. I was staring at the stained glass windows and at the vaulted ceilings and at these niches where all these things like reliquaries were kept, and all of the statuary and saints. And so these, I think, are in the background being influenced by that sort of look and feel. And so they're about 4 or 5 foot tall stacks of glass. They are not bonded in any way. They're not glued together. They're just stacked and photographed and then taken down. So it's very precarious. I love that aspect of the intricacy of making the work, the difficulty of making the work. These exposures this is a large camera. This piece is 40 inches tall by 30 inches wide. And it takes a good hour to an hour and 10 minutes to expose these, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, depending on exactly what I'm doing. And so everything kind of has to sit still. Any slight movement, it can tip over the tower. Just the heat from the lights, there are 20, 30, 40,000 watts of light being used. And they're very close to the subject. The glass heats up to a point where you can't even touch it. And it has shattered at times, pieces.
I was going to ask that. I didn't want to ask if there were any, sort of situations in terms of setting this up, and then tell the audience tonight, I mean, basically about what your camera technique is, because this is an antique technique that you're working with.
Right. So photography it's magical, but it's really quite simple also. It's just the phenomena of the way light travels. So if you have a tiny round opening and you have bright light that's striking that opening, light rays are coming through it, and opposite that, projecting an image of the world that they see upside down and backwards. And that's the way your eye works. That's the way analog cameras work. That's the way digital cameras work. It's very simple. This is the most basic camera you can make. It's called a pinhole camera or camera obscura. It's just a box of any size or any kind of container that is light tight. So it could be any shape, really, any size. It could be the size of a room. So this camera is 40 inches tall by 30 by 30. And the light sensitive paper is just suspended at the back of the camera. And on the other side, you have the pinhole. And so that's all done in a dark room. And then when ready, the flap covering the pinhole is removed, just like you would click your shutter in a camera to let the light in. The flap is removed. And instead of a split second, it stays open for an hour, 50 minutes, an hour and 10 minutes. And it just looks out on that scene. And the paper slowly records the image as enough light strikes it to make that exposure. It just takes a great deal of energy to expose the paper. It was never meant to really be exposed this way. It's normally in a dark room with a negative, and you're enlarging an image to that sheet of paper, or you're making photograms. But within 20 and 30 seconds of exposure through an enlarger, maybe at most a couple of minutes, these, because the light is so dim coming into the camera and the camera is so deep, it just takes a really long time to expose. And
Robert,
then
maybe you can move us to another slide and also enlarge your screen so we're not seeing your toolbar and we see your full image.
oops,
Yeah, there we go.
There we go.
Perfect.
So essentially, without getting into too much detail, I'm standing there after the scene has been lit and then going through a sequence of steps to get the end result I like. So it's not just click and sit for an hour and 10 minutes, but rather lights are going on and off. Lights are being adjusted at different times. Lights are being moved. The color of light is being changed at certain points during the exposure. So it takes 5 or 6, sometimes 7, 8 tries to get where I want. I process the piece immediately. I look at it. I make decisions about what's not working. I change those things. I take notes on exactly what I need to do next, and then I reshoot it. And that gets torn up, and then I just keep shooting until I get exactly what I want.
Now, it doesn't sound like you even using an assistant, right? I mean, you're kind of doing this all as yourself primarily. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not great at at that intense. I love collaborating, but not at that intense moment where I enjoy controlling that myself. But I do occasionally have assistance because I'm doing live dodging and burning, so there are shadows being cast on certain parts of the image, so it remains lighter, and more intense light in areas I want to be darker. So I just, 2 hands is never enough. So there are people helping me with that part of the process sometimes.
I mean, and what a unique process, and it's also very intuitive. But unlike a photographer where you used to with the film camera, you got the Polaroid. I mean, you're creating these works, and you have to discard them till you get what you're kind of now the other question is, do you in your mind know what the image is going to look like before you sort of set everything up, or have you been surprised and you're like, oh, I love this, let's go in this direction? I mean, is it a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of both. It took a few years for me to understand exactly what would happen, and I did a lot of testing. I just took certain colors, certain materials, certain kinds of surfaces, glossy, matte, more transparent, more opaque, and I just photographed them as tests, just like a ceramic artist would do glaze tests.
Yes.
For months and months, I just did testing of objects and exposure, and so I got a little bit familiar with what would happen. But the beautiful thing is that there's still so many surprises. And what I tell students at Hartford Art School all the time, which I love to teach, is that although you set out with clear ideas in mind, you have to allow for those fun surprises and things to happen. And you have to allow for a relationship and a dialogue between you and the work. You can't be so set
rigid.
on
Yeah.
exactly what's going to happen to lose all this other stuff that might actually be better than what you wanted to start with.
Planned. And then tell viewers what we're looking at here on the left, this kind of very also using glass, about the photographer and where that fits into the history of photography.
Sure. So this is the the very beginning of photography. This is Henry Fox Talbot on the left, whose work I've admired for a really long time, and he was one of the inventors and at the very beginning of photography. Is one of the earliest images made, and it's from a series called The Pencil of Nature, a small book. This particular piece is called Articles of Glass. There's another piece called Articles of China, and so my series are called Objects of Glass and Towers of Glass in Italian. And so there's an homage here to Henry Fox Talbot, and really this served as an inspiration for these large, let me click forward to these large pieces. So that one you were looking at is a detail from this. These
so
are
all one work, right?
correct. Yeah, one long work. These are 30 tall by 40 wide each. So it's 160 inches wide by 30 inches tall. And I love the illusion that it appears to be this giant bookcase that might exist, but it never really existed this way. It's an illusion that makes it look like it's just one giant space.
And then this red, it's like the color of an inferno, or a blast furnace. I mean, it's just sort of such a fascinating shade. I mean, where did you come up with this red? I mean, what does it signify for you? It just really, when you see this work.
I love how dramatic it is, but I think you had it right in your first few words that it's a kind of a recognizing the process of glass blowing and glass making. That furnace, if you've ever seen glass blowing, it's intense. Just the glow, the way that glass glows, and how quickly it cools and changes color and so forth. So I thought these kind of look like they're still in the annealer cooling, or in the kiln, or in the glory hole. The glass, it just looks alive when it's coming out of the furnace.
I mean, this has a remarkable presence, and then they're also totemic, and then there's also a degree of abstraction. I mean, it's you pull back from this, and it becomes just a pattern. So there's really a lot going on here, and this is very odd. I mean, looking at this becomes, I'm seeing this as a room where this is in a room and you're having this experience, and you could put objects in there. It just becomes like this has become an environment. Looking at this, just a room of this, just very interesting.
Well, thank you. I'll look forward to another large grid.
Oh, look at this. And, again, so abstract, but you've introduced, you've kind of this amazing, the opposites, the classic opposites, this great tropical green, and then, magenta onto violet. And did you always conceive this as this sort of, this is considered one work, is that right? It's one piece.
It is, and if you noticed in the last one, in the fiery red one, okay, there we go, that they don't actually connect. They appear to at first glance, but they don't actually connect panel to panel. But if you look at this work, which was made a little bit later, I started getting interested in different ways of doing this. And so if you look here, the objects actually cross over. And this was fun and challenging because, mathematically you've got to figure out where each piece goes so that then it crosses over. So each of these is made one at a time. The camera is stationary. So, and you'll see it a little bit in the next few shots, but the camera is stationary. It's photographing scene one. Then the glass that's in that scene is slid over and new objects are put in. So it's kind of a conveyor belt. Mm-hmm. So I've got to know where to put the object that was on the right on the left, that now it splits it down the center or it connects itself to the image. So each one is made separately. It never existed like this as a giant bookcase, right? So that's the fun part of it. And the fact that they don't exactly connect with each other, that kind of schism that happens, and that sort of adds a kind of dynamic tension that I really love. And in this particular piece, if you look at a lot of the glass pieces, they're more transparent. During the exposure, some pieces are pulled out of the scene, so they're kind of ghosted. So they begin to disappear. And you see some that are very ghosted in the background that are just barely there. So they were there for a very little time. I'm in every single one of these as well, which, I think of these as portraits, but also a little bit like self-portraits, because if there's ever a future technology that can extract the fact that my hands were in view of the camera, because the exposure is so long, it doesn't have a chance to record me. But when I stick my hand into the scene, there is light reflecting off of it, and it is going into the camera. It's just not striking the paper long enough to detect that. But there's got to be some faint something there, right? At least conceptually, I love the idea that in every single one of these, my body or hands or something has passed in front of that camera during the exposure.
I mean, just really startling. And then how did you discover this technique? I mean, was this something you pioneered in graduate school, or when did you start working in this, this sort of signature, manner of being in the photo, your of creativity? How did you come onto this?
Yeah, that's great. And lots of things influence our work, right? There's so many layers, but basically in a nutshell, the camera Obscura pinhole camera is where every basic photo class starts, right? You've got to understand that phenomena of the way light travels and all those basic things. And then you move up to a camera from there, 4x5, 35 millimeter, whatever. But we all start at that. And so I remember as a kid making a pinhole camera. And then once I went to art school and then I got out there and then I had the opportunity to start teaching as an adjunct, and I used making a pinhole camera with my high school students and college students as an assignment. And at one point, somewhere in 2005, probably, I began to notice a difference in a student. Well, the difference is much later on, but what I was doing was giving that pinhole camera assignment and having students build cameras out of cardboard. Really simple, right? Flash forward, each year, the ability of those students to produce a camera that was light tight, square, that worked well, has changed. And it's not a good or bad, it's just an observation that our physical relationship to the world and to each other has changed dramatically since the onset of new digital technologies. The dexterity of students and the way they use their hands and their relationship and sensitivity to physical things is dramatically different than mine, and dramatically different than a student 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I could say, take home these instructions, this material, bring home this box, and it would come back and it looks like a box and it's light tight, and they could cut lines and read a ruler. And again, these are not criticisms. This is just a fascination with what's changing. And when I give that assignment now, what comes back is mostly not a camera, but some kind of alien baby or something, but it's not light tight and it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
You know, I think this is also fascinating. People are able to, you know, be on digital devices, and, you know, BlackBerry, years ago, people had a certain way they were in the BlackBerry. Now, of course, that's so obsolete, but, or video games and using the thumbs and all this. And that age too, where professional people, I talked about this with my gentleman in Utah, but professional people used to be able to do woodworking, home repair, all that. And that time is kind of gone. People are, they're makers, and then there are other people. It's just interesting. And I think, you know, kind of thinking about all this, your work is bringing that up. And then your work is so, you know, you have to, you're doing, I think Bryn commented on this, you're doing a bit of performative work when you create these, because you're just not happening. You have to drive this with the lights, the colors, movement, and look at this extraordinary image. I mean, this is just like, tell us what we're looking at here. And then the effect back here, we looked at this yesterday. It looks like a big emerald glowing. I mean, what is going on here, Robert? It's pretty amazing, huh?
Thank you. Thank you. You know, I'm always surprised when they come out of the chemistry and I get to see them. I'm always, that magic still has not faded for me. All these years later, it's as exciting every single time. And working in reverse here for the most part, if I want that beautiful purple magenta color, I need to think green or a certain kind of yellow to get that purple. If I want blue, I have to be thinking reds and oranges. You're looking at a negative, because normally you would photograph something on film, which would then be inverted when you make an enlargement back to a positive. But these are shot directly to paper, and paper records the image differently, a little bit differently than film. Film has a much wider range and has more nuance in the way it records. The paper, in this particular way of exposing it, doesn't. So you have to get really accustomed to how it translates color and so forth, and how it sees, how it reacts to the intensity of the light. So here you're really looking at that background is a red piece of glass, and the density of the red is what creates that particular green, blue, or aqua color, whatever you want to call that color. And it's just a flat piece of glass back there, even though it looks like a deep space or a pyramid or an emerald, like you said.
It totally does, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then this purple has a patterning going on too. I don't know what that comes from. What is that?
Yeah, it's a wallpaper. It's like a dollhouse wallpaper that, you know, was picked for it, the way it mimics the shape of the goblet in the center. So it sort of enhances that shape and kind of repeats it. It almost looks like it's a reflection of the object on the walls, repeated over and over again. And so those are all pierred, and just like the texture on the bottom piece of glass, that dish has that similar sort of scallop texture as the walls do. So they're all selected quite carefully to do that. Oops, sorry, my bar is showing again at the bottom.
Oh, and the other question is now, you know, some of these was that previous one that was, and it looks like the one in the middle here, is that a Venetian glass piece? And
yeah, I think both of those are, yes.
They're very elaborate and Baroque. And then what we should also bring out is these are all singular works. I mean, these are not addition pieces, because with your process, you can only, you know, we discussed yesterday, you might be able to do a variation of that, but that work only really exists once, right? I mean, because it's like that. It's
right. Right, there's no negative, there's no film, so this is, there's no digital file, it's just a light-sensitive sheet of paper. It goes into the box is the same size as the paper. This is 16 by 20, so this box is 16 by 20, and each one that's made is one of a kind. I will sometimes shoot, like I said, the same exact still life over and over again until I get what I want, and at times I'll keep more than one of them. So there are variations, but none of them are exactly the same. I can't possibly, in a 45-minute to an hour and 10-minute exposure, do exactly the same thing with the way I'm casting shadows or turning on and off lights. It's not mechanical, it's human. So every single one of them is a little bit different.
Differently. Now this one becomes, it looks like, I don't know, an African totem or some sort of sculpture, kind of Brancusian. I don't know what when you see this, are you seeing the formal properties? Or I know we spoke yesterday, you cited the name of your aunt, she this beautiful name, you know, where some of these your treasures came from. Are you seeing both? I mean, are you kind of like, this dish was used in the dining room, I remember with the family, you know, fancy family dinners? Are you kind of going back and forth between these beautiful sort of properties of your created images and then thinking about your family? Do the works function in both those ways for you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little bit of all those things. You know, taking the formal issues into mind. There's the personal storytelling that's there that I think also translates universally, because so many of us have seen these objects, recognize these objects, have had these objects in our lives. We're similar. So there's this back and forth. So there's the formal, there's the family, there's the storytelling. And then there's just that engagement with the process of analog photography and the magic of light and chemistry. And when those things come together, what happens, and the unexpected. There's also this interest in producing work that looks very contemporary with this traditional old process. And these newer materials. And so there's that interest too. And then beyond that, there's this interest in sort of elevating the ordinary to the extraordinary. So taking things and making something else of them. I guess, what's that saying? You know, the sum is greater
Than
than
the parts.
the parts are, what am I trying to think of? You know what I'm trying to think of.
The sum is greater than the parts, because you have these, you know, sort of pieces, they might have been, you know, fairly modestly priced in the 50s. Now, if you went in an antique shop, they would be, you know, different price ranges, but you're assembling these. And then this is a really sci-fi image. It's so alien, and you feel like this is sort of glowing. It looks like, you know, kind of a fearless leader image. And you wouldn't think that this came from a 1950s candy dish, right? I mean,
I think you're right on. Absolutely, Catherine. I think you're right on. They're about transforming the objects into something else, something like, some of them I think look like nuclear reactors, and some look like scientific equipment or tools. Some of them look like huge spaces. I like that they become something completely else than they are to begin with.
Mm-hmm. I mean, look at this. This looks like melting glass. I mean, I feel like we're looking inside a furnace, and this makes me think of growing up in Pittsburgh, what a blast furnace would look like, and
Yeah.
you know, Jones and Laughlin Steelworks or something like that. And but then it's also, it looks like seashells, and we can understand it's glass, but it's just a unique image. And there's also, seems like an Alice in Wonderland quality here, with forms being inverted. I don't, you know, and I'm wondering about, I wouldn't want to be your studio assistant in case something didn't stack up well.
It happens. It happens, but you can also see the interest in that baroqueness, the pattern on pattern, the intricate detail, all of the lines and shadows cast, and there's a desire for beauty in all of these too. And then the figurative work, I'll move forward here with that one. The figurative work, same thing. You know, there is a desire to make something beautiful, but I think it's more about the experience of beauty, what that means to me. Beautiful is a difficult word in the art world, right? It can be very difficult to use that word. And I want to embrace it. Yeah, it's part of this work, and it is, it's a surprise that the work is beautiful, because if you saw these still lives in person, Bryn, Catherine, and Jeffrey and I were talking yesterday, it is about the ugliest still life you can make. The uglier it is in person, the more beautiful it becomes in the Pinhole photograph. It's a remarkable transformation. So the beauty happens in the making. It's not just inherent in the objects, and I love that.
These are very luscious, and they have, I'm looking at these almost are taking on, these fashion. There's a fashion, to me, they're so opulent. And I'm also thinking about Versace. I mean, this is something like Johnny Versace would have had in his palazzo in Miami. I mean, these are very super Baroque, Versace, Lacroix. I mean, there's something like this one, I'm thinking, oh, fashion. And then, some of these are like caryatid figures. It just, I think with really great work, your mind opens and you are going in all these different directions. It's just, here again, I'm seeing these really big, and this becomes a room. Like maybe you'll do a commission for a great hostess's room. I mean, I just can see this happening, something like that. This becomes a bit of architecture too. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the way those center columns become so grand. It looks like a church nave or something, like you're entering this sort of grand space.
Oh, a remarkable image. Oh, look at this. And I don't even know what to say. Here again, you've taken photography and you're making it into architecture, and then there's this such a sense of fantasy here with, you talked about the glass and the tent shapes. Well, this is becoming an environment, and I want to go into a place that looks like this, that has these forms. Is that going to be possible? Can we? I
love that idea. I fantasize that way myself every time, just walking around inside these spaces.
This is, and then we're going now. It's interesting because these segue so beautifully into your work with the figure. Talk a little bit about this now. Is this being created? Did you do the works with the glass first and then you segued, and are you going back and forth between both, sort of the figure and the glass works now?
Yeah, the figure was first, but not for very long, and then into the glass, and then back to the figure. So I've been going back and forth. In fact, even before these two projects, long before these two projects, my career as a photographer has always been in the studio. I've always been interested in constructing what I make. I grew up studying and looking at people like Sandy Skoglund and Jerry Yulesman, who constructed their scenes, whether it was physically or in the darkroom. That's the tradition I sort of was being raised in, or part of it anyway, in art school. And so I'm heavily influenced by that, but it's also just part of my nature. I wanted to be an architect. There's that. I did more sculpture and ceramics in art school, both graduate and undergraduate, than I did photography, because it's all about the set. The making the photograph, it's not always easy, but that part is the least amount of time. It's building the sets and figuring everything out that is really where the work is. And so I did lots and lots of sculpture and ceramics and mold making, and learning how to sort of deal with installation and sets and material and equipment. And so these figurative ones went back and forth, back and forth. I finally landed on these two big projects. And I think I've come to the end with the glass for the moment, and I'm back to the figure. These are earlier figure ones, but you'll see the later ones in a minute. And they're very much about, I treat the glass object and the figure similarly. These are about these stage sets in which the glass object functions as a muse. And here, the figure functions as a muse. It's the focus of my attention, of my desire, of my interest, and so they're not dissimilar in that way. The driving factor behind the subject matter is similar.
I mean, it's fascinating. And then we spoke, yesterday about your travels, and then this tradition of, the Greco-Roman, sculpture. And I mean, these have that feeling of being, something that you almost have seen a version of this in marble somehow. And then look at this. Now this is getting just, very abstract, and almost, I feel like the flesh looks like it's melting, and kind of sci-fi. I mean, this is another sort of iteration of this. Now, is this showing your setup here to get to this?
It is, just so that you sort of, I don't always like to, reveal the secrets behind the work, but I think
back the curtain.
Yeah, when you peel back the curtain a little bit, I think it's kind of fun. And so here, just to get a sense, you can see the camera there sitting on the floor. So that big black box is the camera. There is a sheet of paper, which you see is on the left. The end result is on the left. There's a sheet of paper in that camera, and it's looking out at that scene. The figurative work is much harder to make, because these are also in that 45-minute to hour, 10-minute range. And to have a model hold still that long is very difficult. So it requires shooting them over and over. It requires working with the model and positioning them and providing support behind them that you can't see in a certain way. So there's lots of construction of little objects that hold the model a certain way, but that you're not privy to in the photograph. So they're really hard to make, but I thought it would be fun to just see, this is just a few of the lights surrounding this model.
It must be very hot, so physically this is a challenging, if somebody tells you to, hold a position for 5 or 10 minutes, it's, not easy, but this is for, almost an hour of these hot lights. And, I don't think that would be an easy assignment. And then you're looking at this. I mean, this is, and there's also a sense of, sort of slight, I mean, I feel like a voyeur here, and I'm looking through this, like almost a screen into a harem scene, but there's a male model here. So it's just, there are all these other thoughts that are coming in. It's really interesting.
I love that, because there is a lot of influence there, odalisques and the way female figures have been portrayed in the past. But these are males in more intimate, more vulnerable positions that we're still not accustomed to seeing, even in 2020. There are large numbers of audience that still have sort of strange reactions to nude male figures, particularly when they're in these kinds of poses. And I find that, fascinating. There's something that pushes me to do it more because of that. I know that this would be far more typical of a female pose than a male pose. And I think that sort of wonderful back and forth there. There's back and forth in my work all the time. And I think that's just another one of those layers of back and forth, push and pull.
And this sort of this sensitive male that you're portraying, and it's just to see that it's, another type of being another type of maleness. I don't know. It's just, this may be a time for people to be that way in the world, and they're just open, and they're having this, I mean, I know there's eroticism here, but there's also, like, I'm looking at this person, they seem to be in this amazing environment and just sort of having an experience here, where they're really kind of basking in something. I don't know.
Yeah, they're a little psychedelic. They're a little over the top. They're indulgent. They're decadent. They're fantasy. They're all of those things. And what better a place than the studio and being an artist to experience those things, or to allow yourself to experience those things and think about those things and make work about those ideas. I think it's a remarkable, not sure what to call it, but I think it's remarkable as artists that we have that capacity, that we're given that ability to do that and run with it and run away with it.
And this is just, you're able to see this kind of remarkable in the everyday, all these things. Like sometimes I just don't think we see the world around us. And these are like, wow, this is an amazing world around us. And even the flooring, it's, this is another side of reality. It's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I first started describing them, I described them as the way I would see the world. There's this thing that happens inside the box that allows me to see something that I can't otherwise see. I in the process allows me to see in a way that I can't otherwise. That the only way to see this image is through this process. I think that's really quite beautiful.
I mean, it's the other side, and it's sort of Greco-Roman meets. I mean, these remind me a little bit of that Pippoliti wrist light environment. And then look at this. This is also, I mean, it's a new forest, a new way to be in landscape, but it's, I don't know, it's just sort of a hyper dream landscape, and you have, different types, and there's this kind of a thinker, but a new way to be a thinker. And I don't know, that these torsos sort of, indolently tossed around here. What do you,
Yeah,
is this the same model or different? They're different people, right?
No, it's actually the same model in all three of these images. This triptych is 40 inches tall, and they're each 30 inches wide, so it's 90 across as a single work of art. And there's lots of story there to be told. You can imagine yourself in a relationship with this person. You can imagine this person is lost somewhere. You can imagine this person maybe in so many different ways. As the viewer, your relationship to that person can be through you, can be through me. There's so many different ways to begin to develop a story about what's happening here. Besides everything else, besides the color and the richness and the formal qualities, something's going on. Exactly what, though, I think is left to you to figure out. I don't think it's ever crucial that an audience member, a viewer, an art collector, lover needs to know exactly why and what an artist is thinking. I think it's more of a back and forth. And of course, you're interested in the artist, and that's why we do talks like this, and we talk about what we're thinking. But I love to hear back from the viewer and what they're bringing to the work. All of us are going to look at this differently. We all come from a different place, and so we can't possibly look at them the same way. I think that that's always a beautiful thing about looking at art.
And then this is your one of your most recent works, yes?
Yes, yeah. And so I've finally started work with digital technology. My whole thing for the last 15 years basically has been a 180 degrees away from digital technology and really pushing what can be done with analog photography in the simplest of materials, but yet making contemporary, not only looking work, but conceptually contemporary work. And there just wasn't room for digital technology there. And that has finally sort of found its way into my studio practice, where I'm now making these very large, almost sculptural-like works. I love the quality of Greek and Roman sculpture and the oversized Sphinx, Egyptian Sphinx and whatnot. And so I want to get part of that quality here. And so this is 13 and a half, almost 14 feet across. These are each 50 inches tall by 40 inches wide. It's a huge piece, but they're still photographed with a pinhole camera on traditional paper processed in the darkroom. But the original is 16 by 20. Each panel is only 16 by 20. They're then scanned and then enlarged and printed as inkjet prints. So I finally found a meaningful way for me to marry the digital and the analog photography for a new series of works coming up.
I mean, it's a heroic, and then there's a certain enigmatic, the person's kind of floating. You don't know if they're in the middle of a dream. It's erotic. And then the background is, I don't know what's on the bottom. It's just kind of unique what's going on there. It seems like, it looks to me, somehow you might think this is strange. It looks like a football field on the bottom. Like I'm seeing a gladiator type figure somehow. I mean,
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I like to make the spaces ambiguous and hard to pinpoint. So to just look like you're floating above this kind of deep eggplant colored space of some kind with that beautiful blue in the background. Is that water? Is that sky? What is that in the background?
what is this? And then I want to see, like when I'm looking at this, and I want to see it, I'm visualizing this work in a piece of architecture and people around it. I mean, there's such a sense of they're having an audience here, and what would people do? I mean, I feel like people will be at a place in conversation, really engaging with this, but I can see it in like a domestic place where this becomes, it's just the centerpiece, maybe for an art salon or something. Just so interesting. It's
coming up on just having a few minutes remaining, and I wanted to give Robert the opportunity to answer a couple questions. You've touched a little bit on them already, Robert, but Catherine, as you're exploring the question of what we're looking at here and what this background could be, I think you have an interesting question, Robert, about the importance of space and how you're using space, particularly in these works that are grids. And the question was posed when we were looking at the grids of the glass work, but I think that it's apropos here too. The writer is saying that there's a wonderful sense of depth and endless space, almost reminiscent of one of Kusama's infinity rooms.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and I strive for that. I really like that deep space, and I think it comes from my own relationship to space. If you look at what I've written about my work 25 years ago, it always started with the relationship between me or humans and the space we're in. And I think it comes from early exposure to, at the age of 5, 6, 7, I was really lucky to go with my parents to Italy and to be inside of these gigantic cathedrals and outdoor piazzas, and your relationship to the space that you're in. I mean, everything we've done on this planet is about its relationship to us, right? We build things for us and our relationship to those things we build. So it's all about this interaction between me and the space. So I think that intensity about the space and the way it's used in both the glass objects and these figurative works comes from that early sort of recognition of me in my space, whether it's in a giant nave of a cathedral or on a football field or at the top of a skyscraper or in a tiny bedroom. It's about that relationship and just really studying the space and how I move about it and so forth.
Beautiful. Well, and you had a question from Jane Zabo, who is a wonderful photographer who also does a lot of constructed spaces and can relate to a lot of what you're doing. And you've touched a little bit on it, but Jane was asking, do you know going into your shoot how long your exposures are? And are you doing tests before you're working with a figure and having someone sit for the 50 minutes or an hour that you've referenced? How are you preparing?
Yeah, hi Jane. I can't wait to see you again. I am definitely testing. These are even more difficult than the single panel figures. The single panel figures, it's one shot. Even if it's an hour and 10 minutes, after 10 times, if I get it right, I'm thrilled. In this case, it's 4 different photographs, one at a time. And so it's super difficult to get them to line up and to get the model back into the same exact pose. You know, I don't want it perfect because I could make one shot and slice it in pieces and pretend that it, you know, that it's multiple parts. But each one of these is labored over to get it exactly where I want it, and the foot to just be skewed just so. So again, it creates that little bit of stretch, that little bit of distortion that makes it a more dynamic picture. So I did lots of testing before the model arrived. I would use, you know, anyone around, just their hand in the photograph. I would shoot the scene without a body in it and just figure out how long the exposures needed to be. I did the math so that, you know, I have lines of string that go out so that I can see what the camera is seeing. You know, do your math and figure out what the angle of view is so that I know exactly where I have to move the camera in the scene to get each part where I want it to be. So there was lots of testing. And although I can't determine exactly what I'm going to get, and I don't have an interest in being that precise, I do lots of testing, or it would just take, the model would be too frustrated and say sayonara really quick.
Oh, well, I'm so glad that we got to look at these more recent pieces, and it's interesting that you've actually moved between these two different series of work, and you're now coming back and having a renewed focus on the figurative work. I know this has been shown in Hartford. I hope that we'll have an opportunity to show it closer to home here in Houston. And I want to open it up and say, Catherine, if you have any parting words to close out our hour, but we're just so delighted to have spent this time with you and Robert, and excited to be joining Culture Place.
Well, I think having an art conversation is always quite extraordinary because we often think we know the artist's intent, or we're curious. And, you know, thank you so much, Bryn, you and Jeffrey, for being in the Texas art world. You have brought so much here, and we have really loved having this dialogue with Robert, and, you know, just really seeing all these images. And then for Culture Place through the Dallas Art Fair, and for Sarah for organizing everyone, and also for everyone that's tuned in today, you know, been part of our 6 p.m. chat. And I think the parting word is, you know, it's very important what Culture Place is doing, because it's supporting artists and it's supporting those that have made a commitment to show their work. And we get to be part of this art world here. And there's an opportunity to collect through Culture Place. And Robert's work is, you know, starts off very reasonably from $2,000 and goes up to towards 15. And I don't know, looking at these images, I'm just sort of, I want to go to a home where I can see these images, and, you know, when we can have events and just, you know, homes, museums. But really, I want to encourage everyone to, you know, this is to step up and support and acquire. And I don't know, I hope to be able to see some of this work in museums or homes around Texas or beyond. And just thank everyone for being part of the day here. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We're so excited to be working with Robert and to have the opportunity to show the work on this platform. And all of the pieces that are listed on Culture Place are exclusively available through Culture Place at this time. And as you've mentioned, they're all unique pieces, so they're one of a kind. And we're just delighted to have this chance to highlight it. So thank you so much. Wonderful to speak with both of you, and happy holidays to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, Bryn, the whole team, Suzanne, Erica at Photo Relevance, Catherine, Culture Place. Again, thank you everyone for joining. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.